Hello, my name is Sam New, and I'm taking Media 2010, and this is my assignment for the Media and the Great Recession. Because I'm not able to type like my last essay, I'm doing this a little bit different with video, so I hope it goes well. So, from the beginning, we've kind of discussed during this segment on media that's come out through the Great Recession, uh, going before that to the Great Depression in like the 1930s. We talked a lot about escapism and how obviously the most popular movies of that time during the Great Depression were often this kind of like fantastic, kind of more like upbeat showing of like better times. A lot of them were very like nostalgic pandering. So those who are going through those tough times can like look back at better times. A great example of this I found was The Wizard of Oz in 1939. Although there are some like core elements of, looking deeper into it, not 100% just like fantasy escapism. There are huge elements of that and a lot of allegories in The Wizard of Oz's writing that later, when it was adapted into a movie, kind of makes sense for the time. And you'll find a lot of other like escapism type movies when you look at box offices from like 2008 to 2010, 11. Obviously, we talked about in 2010 with Avatar, Toy Story, Alice in Wonderland, all those, again, very kind of like escapism, not really focusing on like what's going on in your modern day and in the current time of hardships. But the movies that really caught my interests are ones that were written or like being adapted during that time and either released at the end or right after the Great Depression, the Great Recession. And when we started this discussion, I was thinking about those movies, although they're not as popular, or they weren't as popular at the time in the box office. They are looked back on for like heavily kind of reflecting the true feeling of the time of those people and those struggles, and kind of like adapting it into a movie form. A good example of this is like The Grapes of Wrath in the Great Depression in the 1940s. Obviously, it's literally about the Great Depression in the 1930s and, migrating to California and all that. Is a literal like experience kind of way of putting that feeling that people had into an art form and turning it into like a movie. It's less like a documentary of their experiences, but more like an adaptation of such. And a modern movie that reminded me of that with the Great Recession is Hell or High Water, which came out in 2016 after the cusp of the Great Recession of the housing bubble, but was writing and film was obviously during that time. What really interests me in this versus escapism is it kind of leans into but doesn't like fully realize the struggles of that time. Hell or High Water being a movie about two brothers whose land is on foreclosure because of banks and the banking system, obviously heavily imply the recession that we had, the housing bubble in 2008, but kind of fantasizes that a little bit in the sense that yes, that was what was going on, but because of that, these two brothers go become bank robbers and kind of do this kind of fantastic, like unrealistic for the average person, but like a way for them to kind of escape those troubles and triumph on top of those, which I kind of see superhero movies as, where a lot of the early 2000s, and even these days, superhero movies were huge. I think Captain America in 2011 or 2012 was like the top box office movie because it shows a person in that struggle, but with some sort of power, like will, overcomes their trials. And I see Hell or High Water as that, but a more grounded version and a more experiences that people can relate to. The boys end up robbing banks, and at the end, the brother who, after despite all the heinous things that were done, we're rooting for these people, and even the commentary within the movie, the people, witnesses, other citizens like within Texas that like witness these crimes, sympathize with the robbers, and talk about how they've had their own financial struggles. The waitress, like the reason one of the brothers doesn't get caught is because the waitress was tipped $200, which the police took away as evidence. And she clearly states it's like, that man, like that money was going to my mortgage, like for my family. And the idea of like mortgages and banks and housing comes up all the time throughout this movie. And eventually, at the last monologue, talks about how the brother comes out on top and is through these bank robberies, pays off his land, is able to like get the lien off of it and harvest oil off of it. And now his children don't have to suffer the same financial crisis that he did. And at the end of the day, that's kind of like a lot of people's worries throughout the Great Depression, the Great Recession, is like, how long is this going to last and how is this going to affect my children? And so movies that show people having the same struggles as we are coming out on top, through, fantastical ways like a movie does, was really interesting commentary to me. And I think that although escapism is the most popular and the most successful kind of way to make commentary in media during these hard times, I think it's interesting to see such like iconic movies like The Grapes of Wrath kind of leaning more into a cynical, more like leaning into the pain sort of deal, and seeing Hell or High Water as kind of a modern interpretation of that. When comparing the two movies, there was an article written in 2016, right before the movie, or like right after Hell or High Water came out, by an author named Adam Schneck. The link will be in the description below. Kind of commentating on this, how the reflection of like, oh, there's this hard time, and right after this hard time, while this was being written or adapted, that how much this like genre, or this time period, affected that genre of like more like depressing, but ultimately like coming out on top sort of movie. So that was my take on the media and the Great Recession, kind of like how that is like taken. And we see movies even today in the 2020s kind of lean into the cynical, like, oh, this is bad, but like here's like an interesting take on it. Movies like Bo Burnham's Inside, I wouldn't consider like fully escapism, but kind of like taking the commentary of what is going on with the pain and kind of turning it into something different and enjoyable, like he does it through comedy. Hell or High Water does it through kind of this like action, the people's goals, and same thing with Grapes of Wrath. So I hope that stirs a few like cogs in your brain. Hope you enjoy that and think about how kind of the cusp of like post, or even like during the end of the depression and recession, kind of how certain filmmakers kind of take that. So thank you so much. This has been Sam on Media in the Great Recession, and hope you have a good one.